A lot of people ask me, where do you get the confidence to do what you do? To make content and put it out there for the world to see. To stand in front of crowds, speak, train, and enlighten. Where did a kid from the township get the confidence to become a business developer, an account manager, a banker, and now an entrepreneur? Where do I get the confidence? Good question. I get the confidence through the stories I hear and believe about the power and capabilities of the human mind. And more importantly, through the stories I keep telling myself about what I'm capable of. I remember in the second year of university, I was writing a semester test for one of my modules. This semester test was very important and would account for 50% of my year mark. I prepared as I normally prepare and arrived at the test venue as confident as ever. After years of religious devotion to the stories about preparation and the greatness phenomenal athletes unlock by spending the hard hours on the training grounds, I vowed to never walk into any arena unprepared. I was that annoyingly diligent student who read chapters before each lectures, never missed a class, studied each day, and had no room in my curriculum for anything less than excellence. The test invigilator handed out the tests, and immediately I felt a cold sweat as the first question was from a chapter that I had not spent hours diligently studying back to front. The next question was also part of another chapter I had not outlined to study intensely as part of the test. My stomach started to tighten when I got to the third question. I took deep breaths and wrote anything I could remember, think of, or make up in relation to the concepts being asked. I finished the test and walked out the test venue, and my heart sank when I realized that I was not going to get the distinction I was hoping for. The next day, the lecturer is going through some of the questions in the test, and I was overcome by an incredible sense of sadness, as what the lecturer was speaking about and what I had wrote in the test was so far apart that I was looking at imminent failure. I had to fight to hold back the tears, then rushed home as soon as class was over. A few weeks later, the test results came out and were to be found displayed on the outside window of his office. At this time, I had made peace with the fact that I was probably going to repeat this module because I had failed so badly that I didn't even make the credits required to qualify for the end year exam. I checked for my student number and I couldn't believe the mark that I saw. I must have checked 20 times. 65%. I got 65%. I remember shouting and dancing in that hallway because the stories I kept telling myself about how capable I was, about how mentally tough I was, about how self-disciplined I was, had paid off in ways I couldn't even begin to explain. You see, if I hadn't told myself that I am an A student, I wouldn't have been able to build the drive to do what A students do. Master the material, excel in tests even in the most bizarre scenarios, and have the self-belief to create self-fulfilling prophecies through the stories I kept telling myself. One of my favorite books is a book called Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind by Yuval Noah Harari. Yuval holds a PhD from the University of Oxford and is currently a lecturer in the Department of History at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. In Sapiens, Yuval breaks down the incredible way humans have been able to create flexible social constructs that have literally taken over the world through the use of widespread fictional stories we tell and believe, like religion, nations, corporations, human rights, and money. In a popular TED Talk, he remarks,
"Money, in fact, is the most successful story ever invented and told by humans, because it is the only story everybody believes. Not everybody believes in God, not everybody believes in human rights, not everybody believes in nationalism, but everybody believes in money."
These are all fictional stories that exist in imagined realities we have adopted. Yet they fundamentally shape our planet in a way where we couldn't even begin to imagine life without these stories. Whether we care to admit it or not, most of the decisions we take are because of the stories told by others that we have believed. You look at the proliferation of consumerism in the 21st century, more especially in the past 50 decades. It's mind-boggling our obsession with buying stuff. Because of the stories we believe that the stuff that we buy will bring us happiness, connection, pleasure, status, popularity, or even respect. The other side of the coin is how entrepreneurship is such a buzzword lately. Not because we want to build commercially viable and scalable businesses over the long term, but because of how digital technology and online media has made it easier for people to try and exploit consumerism by having access to a global audience through a touch of a screen for you to tell your story. All you need to do was log on to Instagram to see the number of influencers selling clothes, makeup, gadgets, and all kinds of stuff. The monstrosity that is companies like Google and Facebook make up to 90% of their revenue through advertising, selling people a space and platform for them to tell their stories and share which stories they have believed. Why is storytelling so important for you and I? Well, if you haven't caught on, our entire planet is shaped by fictional stories. And if we understand these stories, if we understand the stories that shape the organizations we work in, the customers we seek to serve, and the lives we endeavor to impact, then we will be much more influential in our endeavors. The businesses we will be able to create, the products we will be able to innovate, and the brands we will be able to build will solely be predicated on one, the stories we listen to and believe, and two, our ability to tell stories in a way that resonates and spreads to the people and organizations we seek to touch. Modern advancement in the study of human psychology reveals that human behavior is primarily driven by two things: fear or pleasure. Pleasure is a lot easier to understand. We all have an innate desire to feel good. On a physiological level, we all have neurotransmitters that release chemicals like serotonin, oxytocin, endorphins, and dopamine when we are experiencing pleasure. These chemicals determine how motivated we are, how connected we are, and trigger desires for intimacy, laughter, food, and all sensory experiences that make us feel good. So it's important to follow stories that lead to pleasure with caution and moderation. Pleasures become dangerous through the stories we believe. Alcohol abuse, drug problems, pornography addiction, unhealthy diets, toxic relationships, excessive TV watching, and social media dependency are all a result of the little stories we have held on to, that we have used to justify our actions and make us believe that we don't have a real problem on our hands. If you find pleasure in substances that limit you, then you are bound to fight for those limitations. Scary. Pleasure can also be a powerful enabler of grit, perseverance, and tolerance of pain when used in the right narrative in the stories we tell ourselves about the grueling tasks at hand. One of the guys I greatly look up to is David Goggins, the ex-Navy SEAL, ultra-athlete, superhuman beast. He has just released a life-changing book called Can't Hurt Me, which I highly recommend. I have watched all his interviews with Tom Bilyeu, Rich Roll, Louis Hose, Joe Rogan. I'm a little bit obsessed. David Goggins has put his body through some ridiculous stuff and has achieved phenomenal feats. And what I really love is how he uses visualization techniques to picture himself at the finish line, and how he vividly imagines and mentally stimulates the feeling of pleasure that he will feel on the other side of finishing the race or beating the crap of whatever challenge that he is up against. And of course, when he accomplishes what he had set out to do, he gets this incredible sense of pleasure that propels him to do even more. Pleasure turns him into a beast. If we are not running towards something, then we are running away from something. Fear is the neurological response to real or imagined threats. Our desire for safety, security, and stability are all driven by stories we have heard and believed about threats. What's crazy is that most of these stories are fictional and imagined, yet they have such a strong chokehold over our lives. What's even worse is that most of these imagined threats come from stories about us that we have believed, told by other people that we don't even know. Fear is not necessarily a bad thing if you are scared of the right things. I love the response I get when I tell people that I resigned from a really great job. People think of the lack of a financial safety net in my decision and proceed to ask if I wasn't scared. The honest truth, and this might sound a little cocky and arrogant, even though the job was great, I just have this innate feeling and belief that I was destined to live a much bigger life and accomplish greater, more impactful, and much more meaningful things. And the idea of holding on to a safety net and not daring to find out what could be scared me more than anything. So as opposed to the fear of the unknown, instability, and lack of financial security that drives a lot of people, I am driven by a fear of not realizing my potential. The most important storytellers you will ever meet are the ones you see in the mirror every single day. And the most important stories you will ever hear are the ones you tell yourself all the time. Earl Nightingale once said, "We are all self-made, but only the successful will admit it." For the longest time, I struggled with the notion of being self-made. And even in a few videos I have put together, I have declared that there's no such thing as being self-made. I was wrong. Earl Nightingale is dead on the money. See, even though there are people that will connect you to your destiny, whatever that looks like, ultimately it is because of the stories you tell yourself that lead you to making the choices and taking the steps that connect you to those people in the first place. The other painful truth that is so incredibly liberating when we accept it is that our failures are also self-made. One of the other guys I follow and consume quite an unhealthy amount of his content is Gary Vaynerchuck. I love him for two reasons. One, he drops just as many F-bombs as David Goggins. And two, he blames himself for everything that happens in his life. I love that so much because it makes you so accountable for your life and you get a firm grip on the pen you are using to write your own story. Two, it enables you to eliminate the dangerous, crippling enemies called excuses. No matter how valid those excuses may be, when you completely own the narrative of your story by blaming yourself for everything, you give no room for excuses and you turn into an effing execution beast. Here is my closing thought. For me personally, there is only one thing that makes a great story. It is that it's believable. You have believed so many stories, from money to consumerism, to what others say about you through likes and comments on social media, to what your boss says about your capabilities and worth. When are you gonna start telling your own stories about who you are becoming, and what you are capable of? And better yet, when are you going to start believing those stories?